afternoon and welcome to CEC Gurukul lecture. In continuation with the series on sociological research methods, in today's discussion we are going to talk about the method of qualitative data collection, that's ethnography. In the first half of the lecture, we try to understand what is ethnography, its core characteristic, understand ethnography as both method and methodology, and the most significant part of ethnography as a method been applied to in the work organization. Now, here in the second part of the lecture, we are going to discuss how John Brewer defends for ethnography as a qualitative research by giving the instance of his own study and also looking into reflexibility, sampling and other dimension of ethnography in work organization. So, ethnography of the Royal Ulster Constabulary, that is the RUC, was a study done by John Brewer to illustrate how organization ethnography is shaped by access, gatekeeping, researchers' characteristic and ethical compromises. So, the study of RUC in 1987 involved a small ethnographic team with John Brewer employing Kathleen Magee, a young female Catholic, as a ESRC funded research assistant, making it an early British example of multiple research organizational ethnography. Magee's gender and religious identity foregrounded issues of gender and sectarianism inside the police organization, both of which were highly sensitive topics in the Northern Irish context. Access to RUC was overt, negotiated formally with the chief constable as a gatekeeper, but the force was treated as a closed setting where strong control and barriers to research were expected. Following Hornsby Smith's distinction, close access field required careful anticipation of what senior gatekeepers consider sensitive. So, the research had to be framed in a way likely to secure permission. So, that could also lead to the contribution of ethnography, that it allows in some way or the other to become an insider, or where there are a lot of gatekeepers, or where the organization functions as a closed group, where outsiders are not allowed to kind of even be have an entry. So, there is a lot of ethical compromises and gatekeeper influence while doing ethnographic research. So, the strategy of tailoring the research to the chief constable involved an important ethical compromise. The interest of the gatekeeper were allowed to affect the conduct of the research. This highlights a persistent ethical dilemma in overt research, though the author notes that the ethical problem of covert ethnography are equally significant. So, when we look into the idea of the informal gatekeeper, it is basically barriers from below. So, we have kind of different levels of barriers that a researcher kind of needs to overcome or go through, and here the much of the gatekeeping comes from the below. The disadvantage, the first we need to seek permission from the head, that is the chief constable, and it basically becomes a disadvantage in the field because the constable kind of follows the rules which has been given to them by the employer, and they can only allow those entry to those who are in somewhere or the other associated with that organization. So, here when we look into the informal gatekeeper, it raises doubt among lower ranking personnel about why management had agreed to do to the research. So, they on one side they have been given strict instructions that outsiders are not allowed, and then if the researcher is able to get permission, the constable or those at the lower levels are kind of confused in terms of why permission is being granted to an outsider to enter the setting. Then there is also the question of retrenchment, where informal gatekeepers, the rank and file workers, try to restrict the access granted from above. Here the author, that is John Brewer, conducted the retrenchment from below is a significant problem in organizational research as limitations imposed from above. And here the kind of 3 types of case study which has been done to understand the purpose and scope of generalization, referring to Stakes 3 type of classification. The first is intrinsic case studies, addresses one instance of a phenomena, perhaps the only one. The goal is to have a deep understanding of the specific case itself. The second is collective case studies. Focus is on several instances of the same phenomena. It aims to identify common characteristic as permit empirical generalization, applying data to a wider population. And the third type is instrumental case studies. The focus here is on a case because it facilitates understanding of something else, a broader issue or theory. The goal here is to permit theoretical inferences and contribute to the building of social theory. Now, why we discussing case study is that when we are kind of studying work organization, many a time one of the method of data analysis is case study, and here it could be either a case study of an individual, it could be a collective case study, or it could be a instrumental case studies. Now, besides case study, we also know that there are a lot of empirical generalization. Now, empirical generalization, that is applying data to a wider population, can be achieved ethnographically in 2 primary ways. Number 1, parallel or multi-site design. So, you are going to do a study in one specific location and that apply the finding of that study to a larger population. Now, that is kind of called as a generalization. In ethnography, this can be achieved when we do a multi-site design, that is designing the project as a series of parallel ethnographic study using different cases or the same case in different fields, often with multiple researchers. Here there are number of researchers, Brewer, Lockhart and Roger. They were all kind of doing the multi-site ethnography. The second method is the comparative design, designing a single project to follow the pattern of similar existing study in different fields. This allows for cross-study comparison and the building of a body of cumulative knowledge. Now, again let us go back to the RUC study which John Brewer kind of conducted and look into the study strategy. The RUC study adopted the comparative design, which is the second option to kind of allow empirical generalization, and here it maximizes its contribution to the existing knowledge base. The project was deliberately designed to follow the pattern of existing ethnographic studies of police organization. Previous study had a focus on police organization in socially homogeneous society without communal conflict. The RUC study sought to add a critical dimension to this cumulative knowledge, that is studying a police organization in a divided society. This allowed the researcher to explore the specific impact of civil unrest on routine police work. This strategic case selection allowed the RUC a unique case to serve as an instrumental case study, facilitating a deeper understanding of police organization by introducing the variable of societal conflict, thereby enabling theoretical inferences. Careful sampling of cases, time and event in the RUC project was used to make empirical generalization about policing under communal conflict, drawing on grounded theory, notions of theoretical sampling and ethnographic sampling strategies. So, when we look into ethnography and the methods of how it kind of collects data, case selection and theoretical sampling is important to understand. So, sampling is necessary when the unit of study, for example, the police organization has many instances and the aim is to generalize beyond a single case. So, we know in a police multiple types come, and therefore, if we were to kind of do a empirical generalization, it would require to use sampling. The RUC study used what Glasser and Strauss termed theoretical sampling, selecting an optimal case in which the process of interest could be expected to be visible. Within North Ireland, the Eastern Station was chosen specifically because it was located in an area where routine policing still took place, allowing comparison with ethnographies from more socially homogeneous societies. Now then we look into sampling by time and event. Beyond choosing the organization and station, the researcher also had to sample times, events and people so that the observed activity would be reasonably representative of the organization. Following guidance on ethnographic sampling, they recognized that too short or poorly timed fieldwork risks capturing only a typical or abnormal situations. To inform their time sampling, officers were asked to complete time budget diaries, which were then used to decide when the field workers should be present to observe typical patterns of work. Field contacts was initially limited to a few hours per shift once a week, with the intensity of contact increased gradually over time. This incremental strategy helped manage access, build trust and align observation periods with routine activity, thereby strengthening the basis for empirical generalization from ethnographic data. The RUC ethnography used carefully theoretically driven sampling of cases, time and event to make its finding empirically generalizable while also building a viable fieldwork role. Sampling here means selecting one or more cases from a larger set of possible instances when it is impossible or undesirable to study all of them. Sampling is critical when it is impossible to study all instances or cases of the basic unit of study, especially when the goal is to make empirical generalization, that is, applying findings from sample to broader population. Sampling is unnecessary if the unit of the study is a specific organization interested in its own right and all instances can be covered. Sampling is not needed. When we look into the sampling approach as it was used in the RUC study, and it used a theoretical sampling, which is a term which has been given by Glasser and Strauss, and the RUC study used this method which involves selecting an optimal case, the fieldwork site, where the process being explored can be expected to happen in the purest or most relevant form. The goal is to study how police work was affected by communal conflict, yet still link up with studies of routine police work in socially homogeneous setting. Eastern Police Station, where the research was done, was purposely selected as the site because it was in areas of Belfast where routine policing was possible. This ensured the study could observe standard police practices alongside the conflict context. So, there was a comparison of the police organization in a homogeneous setup versus a police setup in a conflict situation. So, beyond the case, sampling by time and event. For ethnography research as cited from Burgess 1984, simply selecting the right location isn't enough. The time frame and the event or people encountered also be representative of the organization. Too little time or unrepresentative encounters can lead to observation of abnormal or unusual events. Police officers completed these to help determine the optimal setting of the time the researcher should spend in the field. Initially, the researchers spent only a few hours per shift once a week, but this gradually built up to full shift, including nights, twice a week over an entire period. This combined strategy, that is selecting an optimal case, sampling representative times and events, and phasing entry, served two linked purposes. First, it aimed to secure a representative cross section of people and situations, strengthening the basis for empirical generalization. Second, the gradual expansion of presence helped the researcher develop a workable field role and establish rapport with officers, which is essential for sustained participant observation. And therefore, when you kind of phase out your interaction with the respondent, it enables to build and maintain trust, and maintaining trust is very, very important in ethnography, and trust is rests on everyday relational qualities such as honesty, friendliness, reciprocity, openness, and good communication, and it typically accumulates slowly rather than appearing instantly. The RUC research suggests that trust is not secured once and for all, but must be continually worked at over long field engagement with ongoing resources in the face of participants' doubts and anxiety. Sustained ethnographic questioning can become irritating, and in Van Manen cautions that researchers should not expect to be liked by everyone in the field. Now, the researchers should not be under the impression that when you have been able to make friends in the community where the research is being done, he or she would be liked by one and everybody. Because what is important is that the researcher is an outsider, and not everybody will accept the outsider as part of the research. So, there has to be a gradual transition from lack of trust to complete trust and becoming a complete insider. So, the rite of passage and test of trust, many officers ultimately became confident enough in Maggie, who was the research assistant in the RUC study. Her presence was to kind of acknowledged by the senior police officers and was used widely shared fears about the research showing how trust can coexist with ambivalence and concern about consequences, because this is a kind of also a police organization where research is done. So, even if you are able to build trust on the researcher, there are a lot of matters which are confidential or that could harm the organization. So, there is an ambivalence in terms of sharing the details with the researcher. A crucial event occurred towards the end of the research, where one policeman subjected the field worker to a grueling test of trust likened to a rite of passage. So, rite of passage is kind of rituals which are done from one stage, from the liminal to the post-liminal stages, and one of the social significance of rite of passage is that it allows the individual to be accepted into the next stage, or even enables the individual to pass from one stage to the other. So, here trust is like a rites of passage. It cannot overnight can be built. It takes time and it goes through different rituals until it kind of becomes completely trust between the two or the individual. So, the access to deep layers of organizational life may depend on passing informal tests during the entire course of the research. Through these tests, the participant assess whether the ethnographer is reliable, respectful, and safe to confide in. Getting people to talk is difficult when trust is not established and remains challenging even after a bond is formed. This is compounded if people subject management's motives for allowing the research access. Informant may be reluctant to talk and avoid one-to-one contact, as noted by Westley in 1970 in a police setting. The primary technique is to hang around long enough to force people to talk. So, when we suddenly, no one wants to talk to a stranger. So, when a researcher visits the field, there are not many who would be reluctant to talk. So, the suggestion or the advice to the ethnographer is to hang around and kind of force the individuals to start talking. The researcher uses props to artificially manufacture or capitalize on naturally occurring moments where sensitive topics arose. And what are the moments where there was a bit of sensitivity? The first is events seen on televisions the night before or on the station TV screen. Things read in the daily newspaper. So, these could be areas where the researcher and the people can start talking. Incidents relayed by computer from other police stations. Recording data in such situation, in such ethnography when conducted in sensitive and closed setting is to be handled sensitively, because many a time it could kind of account to breach of trust, where the respondents are not reluctant to make the researcher use the data for further analysis. So, sensitive data recording of field notes. The ethnographer conventional notepad as well as tape recorder or video camera can be obtrusive and raise suspicion. Given the extensive time in the field, it is impossible to go without aids, as detailed recall later results only in a general impression. So, what are the strategies for unobtrusive notes taking? 1. Take notes as unobtrusively as possible, minimizing the visibility of the pad and the physical act of writing. Number 2, occasionally forego note taking when the situation is sensitive or inappropriate. 3, emphasize that the notebooks are not secret to allay fears. Note taking was not done in certain designated private spaces, the recreation and television room, but was instead done later. The field worker was instructed to leave the notebook around the station so people could read it and confirm it was not secret. This point was occasionally reiterated by showing response extract of the data. Writing of the field notes from the notebook into a more legible form is essential. Next, we need to understand data volume and management. The research resulted in voluminous amount of data, specifically over half a dozen large box files of typed notes. With the bulk made computer assisted analysis packages were very useful. These tools were in their infancy and not used in this particular study. To protect the data, duplicate copies of written up notes were made and stored in different places. The researcher maintained distinct types of field notes to ensure clarity and rigor in analysis. So, there are different types of notes, field notes, which has been referred by John Brewer in his book Ethnography. Notes included people's precise details of time, date, location, participation and context, termed methodological field notes. Substantive fieldwork is a second type, which captured raw observation of events, people and verbatim or summarized conversation, kept distinct from analytical field notes containing researchers' interpretation. And then the third type of field note is the analytical field notes, which is interpretation. These notes recorded the researcher's interpretation of the substantive data. Separation of data and analysis. Analytical notes were deliberately kept separate from the substantive raw data to prevent premature mixing of fact and interpretation. The field worker kept a separate diary from the field notes to record personal and emotional data. This diary later served as the basis for reflexivity, which helped contextualize the researcher results by acknowledging the researcher's influence and experience. So, the researcher's identity is as a myth buster. Ethnographers are neutral, not neutral observers, but individuals whose gender, background and trait influence access, rapport and the data collection challenging the idea that different researchers would produce identical result in the same setting. Feminist scholars like Warren highlighted how gender affects entire trust building and sexual dynamics, making it a primary lens for deconstructing fieldwork. Female ethnographers often benefit from being seen as non-threatening, acceptable, incompetent to receive more explanation and time. So, these instances underscore two main crucial methodological mandates: reflexibility. So, the researcher reflects on his own identity and experience and how that could influence the data. And the second is the duration and intensity. Fieldwork must be sufficiently prolonged and intensive to allow relationship of trust to build before ethnography beyond superficial or identity based role. So, there are a lot of limitations in ethnography and there has been progress as well, and now we have postmodern ethnography. So, there are a lot of guidelines from researchers like Brewer, Hammerley, Silverlin, and they have kind of codified the practices to ensure quality and systematicity in qualitative work. So, we kind of understand the postmodern ethnography maybe in the next lecture. For now, it is sufficient to understand the application of ethnography in the study done by REC in a police organization, and that reflects on building trust, prolonged research, on reflexibility, note taking, and the maintenance of research diary. So, all this will help us to understand the contribution of ethnography as a research method. The reference for this lecture is John Brewer, Ethnography, book published in 2010 by Rawat Publication, New Delhi. With this, I come to an end of this lecture. Thank you.